Well, would you welcome... You just listened to what Sam was saying there about potential rolling back on some of the green targets.
Got 1,000,000%. I mean, in my Red Wall Northern seat, they don't buy the net zero. To me, you know, if...
Where's the evidence for this? I can't see any evidence.
It's not only the freedom argument, it's the economic argument. To me, people were told what to do in lockdown. We shouldn't tell them how to heat their home, what cars to drive. You know, so as a freedom-loving conservative, that's, you know, I find that very excellent. But besides that, the economic argument, you know, I don't want to make people poorer. I don't want the working-class voters to have to pay for the middle...
True. Why don't we just give people guns and just make murder legal, right? Burning the planet down is far less damaging than an individual person being killed. So if you want to go and say, well, actually, no, we want to give people the freedom to do what they want, I'm like, well, where does that end? By what metric is that freedom going to be in any way relevant? In fact, I would like to, quite frankly, personally, to have the positive freedom of having a future in which the planet that I'm going to be living on for the next 60, fingers crossed, years doesn't burn down in that time. That is indeed the positive freedom I would like to take on the net zero debate. And you're right, Rohack, people don't have to throw away their cars. It's a ban on the sale of new cars. I'm going to be super free. We're going to be so free in our flooded houses and our burnt down neighbourhoods and our forest fires and our holiday destinations. But we'll be so free. We'll be as free as the person who is stranded in the desert with no water and no clothes. They're free to do what they want, but their options are severely limited in what they can and can't do with that freedom.
Middle classes to drive their electric cars, Sophie.
Yeah, I think that's a load of nonsense, really. I think the thing that people care about is cost of living, and a lot of these green measures, would make things cheaper. If we had an adequate insulation programme in this country, we've got some of the leakiest housing stock in Europe. That would bring down people's energy costs.
Carla Denyer, the leader of the Green Party, she's been absolutely hammering the idea of insulation because it's so cheap and easy to install and saves so much money. Like, you get ROI on it, like, instantaneously by investing in proper insulation for a lot of our very, very poor housing stock. And that would immediately save loads of bills and stop relying on people like Putin, which is the obvious line they always go with for why we need to continue drilling in the North Sea even more. We need to expand it so that we don't rely on Putin. We wouldn't need to rely on Putin if we didn't use so much bloody gas because our homes are not properly insulated enough.
But if we had green energy.
I listen to you very patiently, so you've got to listen to me now. If we keep people reliant on fossil fuels, which are subject to the kind of external shocks that we've seen with the war in Ukraine, which sent people's gas bills soaring, we're more vulnerable than if we've got domestically produced green energy, whether that's solar, whether that's wind, whether that's hydro.
And it's cheaper. It's literally cheaper to have renewable energy than to cross your fingers and pray that the gas futures are going to be in your favour so that they become slightly cheaper. It's now, with the current technology we have, it is cheaper just to get your energy from renewables and from nuclear. I mean, I have my issues with nuclear power, but if you want to go down that road, you can do, and it's still cheaper than fossil fuels. It's about having the political will to change that infrastructure, to actually invest in the new production. It would save everybody money, and it would save the planet, and we just don't do it because there are far too many vested interests with people who have links to the petrochemical industry in the halls of power in this country. And that is the real problem, is there is no political will. There's no political will for it. The public want it, and the politicians don't want to do it. China's building immense solar power arrays at the moment. China have installed more photovoltaic capacity in this year to date, the last 8 months, the last 9 months, more photovoltaic capacity than the United States have in its entire existence. That's absurd. That's completely absurd. And this idea that, oh, China aren't pulling their weight, when China literally have been pulling their weight, right? I'm not some kind of China stan. I'm no Dengist. I'm not going to shill for China. But the objective facts are there. If you want to look at a country that is doing its job in trying to decarbonise later than everybody else because they industrialise later than everyone else, but at least they're doing it, they are putting huge amounts of capital and labour and physical resources into overhauling just how much they rely on fossil fuels. And we're not doing it. We're not doing it. And it would bring people's bills down. It would literally bring people's bills down. Not just because we'd be expanding the amount of energy we're creating, basic supply and demand, but the energy we would be creating would be cheaper than what we pay on the global wholesale market for gas in our far too reliant energy system on gas power plants. Again, specifically of the problem of Margaret Thatcher and the privatisation of our energy network, which incentivized gas-powered startups in the 90s because they were cheap to start when you were trying to compete with British Gas once they had lost their de facto control over the market post-privatisation. That's literally the Tories' fault that we rely on so much gas. And Nick Clegg failed on trying to deliver things like nuclear power because it would take too long to come on, which they would have come on by now. And of course, you know, Labour could have done more when they were in office too, but that doesn't take away from the Liberal Democrat and Conservative failings on energy policy, which we'll see in a moment.
There may need to be some nuclear capacity so that we're at that base load, but I think that we can be moving a lot faster to have a decarbonised energy grid than we are. And the thing which winds me up is that we've had a decade of wasted opportunities. We had interest rates at historic lows. It would have been very cheap for the government to borrow. But then Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng crashed the economy into a wall. And now it's going to be a lot more expensive to do those things. We keep kicking the can down the road. We keep booting this problem into the long grass, hoping it will get better, and it won't. And you know the thing about cost of living, that's going to get worse with climate change.
Cost of living is going to get worse with climate change. Food is going to be more expensive as crops die. There's going to be a population increase. We're going to have to take more climate refugees. There's going to be so much money that's going to have to be spent by the state, ensuring that other states in the global south don't collapse because of the damage that we are doing to them through climate change. By exporting all of our production out to China, China is one of the biggest polluters overall, not per capita. They are that because of the amount to which that we have exported our production to China. And whilst it's bad that we've exported our production, we should have more production here. That's gutted loads of working class manufacturing jobs, mostly across the north. Why we should blame China for our move towards deindustrialization and then their subsequent taking in of our, what we would be expelling in carbon, for example, it's nonsensical. It's completely nonsensical.
What did the Labour government actually do in this area? You know, they was in power for, more than a decade, so I have to disagree with you there, Ash.
Disagree with what? She didn't mention the Labour Party. She didn't mention the Labour Party at all. Is Ash Sarkar now a spokesperson for Gordon Brown as Chancellor from 97 to 2007? She's not even Labour affiliated. Dare I say it, she's a critic of the Labour Party. She's a critic of Gordon Brown and Tony Blair because she's literally a communist. She's not a spokesperson for the Labour failures, but of course they can't ever, as far as Andrew Jenkins is concerned, ever face down the fact that they failed on this. Their only answer is but Labour, because so many people are so electorally politics brained, they can only ever think of politics in terms of red team versus blue team. But when she's faced with somebody like Ash Sarkar, just like Piers Morgan was all of those years ago, whose politics is outside of party politics, she can't respond.
Fucking neoliberalism.
Neoliberalism indeed. I couldn't think of a better time for that subscription to come through. Thank you, the random guy. Much appreciated for the support, as always.
And I agree it's about the cost of living. And, I've been speaking to some businesses. Businesses have had to jump through hoops. Some have gone bankrupt to try and actually meet these targets. And it's just wrong. The economy has been trashed through the war in Ukraine and also COVID. We actually need
and
to...
your last party leader.
Oh, no, you
Come on.
No, you cannot say that. She's actually been proven right with her.
Oh, she's been proven right. Look at what happened to the pension funds. What happened to all of the QE? The bank had to emergency buy all of those bonds. Did that just not happen, right? And in fact, if you're saying, well, we needed the Liz Truss tax cuts to ensure that we had economic growth, the ONS have literally upgraded the country's growth by 2%, which is the growth apparently that we need to be having to be back on track in terms of economic growth, given how little growth that we have had. And you're here saying, well, actually, we needed Liz Truss to get the growth that we had already, given the new ONS figures. And I'm like, no, you've been proven wrong. You've been proven explicitly wrong that even without Liz Truss, the economy has been growing. And she was also wrong in the fact that we absolutely needed more capital spending on infrastructure in this country, on energy generation, on the transition to net zero, fixing our schools, fixing our hospitals. And our economy has collapsed because of the fact that she wanted to spend even less public money on our public services than Rishi Sunak does, who also wants to cut this stuff back as well. Jeremy Hunt wants to cut benefits, etc., wants to get disabled people in. And you're here saying we should have even more tax cuts? This is nonsense. This is complete nonsense. It's ahistorical nonsense.
Economics, actually. But also, the country...
This is emote worthy. By next stream, I will have an emote up for this particular face, or a gif of her doing the reaction, because it's too perfect. It's too perfect as a response to the absolute nonsense these people are saying. You know what the craziest thing about these people trying to rehabilitate Liz Truss because they think that somehow they've won the argument even though they've explicitly lost, is that this is like the worst you could do if you're a Conservative Party who was trying to get re-elected. If you're trying to get re-elected, why are you trying to say, well, actually the big mistake we did was putting in the guy who undid all of the stuff that damaged people's pension funds and mortgages? If you're saying to people, well, actually what we should have done is double down on the tank tower polling so low that Liz Truss had a lower approval rating than Vladimir Putin, right? That's how low her approval rating was. And we're now saying we need to go back to this and that we've been proven right. And actually it's good when your mortgage increases. It's good when your pension fund tanks and you lose, tens of thousands of pounds of pension equity. And they're saying this is what we should have done. Like, who's going to vote for this party full of these people who think that it's actually really good when loads of members of the general public just lose huge amounts of money? It's electorally cancerous, as far as I'm concerned, for her to be saying this. Go ahead. You go praise Liz Truss. Go continue. Do what you want. I'm fine. If you want to take this line that ruining people's lives for an economic gambit at the best of the Institute of Economic Affairs is somehow this great election winner, then you go ahead. You try. You try full well to try and win on the idea of removing taxes on a very small section of the population and then also not doing an OBR response and tanking the markets so that they had no trust in the government at the time. And that was a problem for people's bills and people's mortgages and people's pensions. You can run on that if you want, but I think it will get you even further into the mire than you already are.
And globally have been through these unprecedented times. You've got to allow the country to recover economically, and you don't do that by actually putting more measures in place that make people poorer and actually where they've got to change the heating system, change the cars. I've got nothing against actually looking at different resources, because to me, for energy security, that's so important.
Quick thought, Ash.
They don't have to change their cars, yeah. They have to change their cars to be ULEZ compliant, which is 6% of cars in London, which is a very small amount, and there's a scrappage scheme anyway. And even then, the 2030 ban on new sales of petrol cars, not banning of use of petrol cars. And it's banning new gas boiler installations. But I think there is a move to try and subsidise replacements to input heat pumps, yeah.
Because we're running out of time.
I mean, very quickly, we're seeing the impact of climate change on food prices now with olive oil and tomatoes. That's going to get worse. And unless Britain does absolutely everything it can to reduce its share of the carbon budget, we're going to see that get worse.
You know what? Big disagreement, but respectful. That's what we're all about. Big range of views from the Politics Hub, but respectfully done.
I mean, I wouldn't be showing Andrea Jenkins any respect. I mean, they said it was respectful debate whilst Sarkar was going,